Okay, so again, this is another PowerPoint from Civics, which is a great resource to better understand Canadian politics and politics in general. And so we're going to be looking at political spectrum and political parties. Hopefully we'll get through all 19 slides. I'll try to be quicker this time around in the morning. So first thing to understand, or what would be useful to understand, is ideologies, which are just systems of belief. They're sets of values. It's how you see the world. And I would add how you interact with the world as well, right? Because it's very easy to say that, and you know, the older you get and the more you talk to people, you'll learn that they will verbally express a particular belief, right? So someone might say, well, you know, we should stop hunger, right? People shouldn't be going hungry in the world, or let's say in Edmonton or Leduc, whatever. So they express a belief, which is part of their ideology, but then I would add in that you should look at what their actions are. So if someone thinks that hunger is a terrible thing and we should eradicate it, what are they doing to help solve that problem? Right? So even donating $5 to a food bank every month, every week, is better than nothing, right? And so it's important to look at people's actions, not just their words as well. But once you've found people who are believing, speaking, and acting in a way that you agree with, right, you can join together, and those people, you know, you can form a political party or a political movement or a nonprofit, whatever it is, or a business as well. And your beliefs will determine what you think should be done to solve some of those civic issues that come up from time and time again, right? So what to do with, let's say, homelessness, how to solve poverty, how to fight crime, right? What should be done about housing, immigration, all of these issues. Your beliefs, your perspectives will play a role in how you think those problems should be solved. So there's 6 main points here to focus on for how your beliefs are shaped. First is your culture and personal experiences. Okay, and some of us come from different parts of the world. How many of you were born outside of Canada? Okay, so a handful of us. So even how that impacts us as well, right? And don't get me wrong, I was very young when I moved to Canada, but the culture I grew up in my home was quite different than the culture I experienced at school, right? And what was acceptable at home versus what was acceptable at school is very different, and that impacts my beliefs and how I act in the world. Okay. You can also be impacted by the values and beliefs of your friends and the people around you, your family, aunt and uncle, whoever you're interacting with, right? And you're at a time in your life, about 13, 14 years old, where you're slowly starting to shift, you know, this is psychological stuff, you're starting to shift into a mindset where you're more concerned about what your friends think than maybe what your parents think. Right? And getting the approval of your friends and the people around you is very important at this time in your life. And so you might fall into some values or beliefs that are not aligned with who you are, but maybe that's what's going on around you, and you know, it makes a lot of biological sense to try and fit in. But as mentioned, you know, as you age 25, 35, 45, you'll start to notice some of your beliefs shifting. Okay? The people you're surrounded by are going to be different, and the experiences you have had will be different than other people. But for now, you might be very inclined and persuaded by the people around you, what they're up to. Okay? Your religion, for those of you who are religious or practice religion, it can have a big impact on your values and your beliefs, on how you think people should behave in this life, what you think the result of their actions are, or consequences as well. Social status and wealth. So if you're very wealthy, you might have a different perspective on how to solve problems or what is and isn't a problem, versus if you're not very wealthy, right? You know, if you have a lot of free time and wealth, you know, you may be able to spend more time thinking about, you know, as Dave Chappelle would say. I don't know if you kids know who Dave Chappelle is, but He's a stand-up comedian. He's got a pretty funny bit where he says that as a wealthy black man in his 50s now, I guess, that he finally has time to think about how he feels about certain things. He didn't have that privilege when he was younger, right? And so that can be impacted by your social status and the amount of wealth you have accumulated. Where you live can also have a big impact on your beliefs as well. I told the morning class about this, so I'll share this with you as well, but you can always find these silly YouTube videos online where a reporter or a journalist will go around, they'll interview random people in America, whether it's on the streets or in a store. I remember seeing one where they were asking people in a grocery store in a city, where do you think this meat comes from? And some people legitimately did not know that you have to kill an animal to get this meat, right? And so they're living in an urban setting. They're so far removed from food production that they have no idea how the grocery stores are filled up, where that food comes from, right? And I'm sure there's people out there that don't realize that it's kind of abnormal to have bananas and watermelons and oranges in the middle of winter, right? The only reason we can do that is because of globalization, which is a grade 10 unit. Yes? Sure. Just walk around this way, then I'll cover the camera. Whereas, if you live in a more rural area, you might not necessarily enjoy or appreciate, the city as much. It might feel a little bit more hectic, a little bit more chaotic. There's a lot of people you don't know, and that can impact your beliefs and how you act in the world. Okay. The media. How many of you watch the news, like at least once a week? Okay. Just not that many of you. A lot of you don't watch the news then.
My mom does.
Okay, so you witness it.
Yeah.
Okay. So for those of you who watch the news, do you ever find it very depressing?
Yep.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, sad, right?
It's like you wake up in the morning and
You wake up in the morning and what kind of stories did they tell you?
like that people die in car crash.
People died in a car crash,
Fires.
some places on fire,
COVID's coming back.
COVID's coming back allegedly, right? Are these happy stories?
No, there's like one happy story once in a while.
Somebody said that in the morning class too. They said there's one happy story for 30 seconds at the end of it.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? Probably not good, right? Does that make you hopeful for the future when all they do is give you problems? You wanna, right? So if you're just constantly watching the news, you might have a very different belief of what's going on in the world than if you were to just go for a walk outside, right? They might tell you on the news like everything's going to hell in a handbasket, the world's gonna end. Then you go for a walk and you're like, hey, like no one's panicking. No one's reacting as the news says they should be. And yeah, it's useful to be connected to the media, but as we're seeing, like there's also mental health ramifications, consequences to just watching the news all the time. So for this slide, you might want to draw out this spectrum. So make sure you have a right and left side, and I'll tell you the 4 ones you should focus on for the time being. So in grade 12, they talk a lot about communism and fascism, and they're on opposite ends. They're kind of extreme ends of, although to be honest, fascism does have a lot of government control as well, but usually there's one group that's preferred over others, right? And so the raging example of fascism is typically Nazi Germany, where the Germans were elevated over other groups, and there was an enemy group as well, which was the Jews. Okay. Communism, on the other hand, is very extreme government control and intervention. Right? So the government has a lot of impact on what you can and cannot do. Okay. So a friend of mine, he wrote a book called The Freedom Swimmers, in which he talks about his family's dealing with communism, dealing with communism in China. Let's see if I can come up with a different story from the morning. Yes? Where? This? Libertarianism. You don't need to focus too much on that one for now. That's a little bit out of grade 9. But so a story from this book. So when the communist regime took over China, my friend, his mom was quite young. His grandpa was a government official, and he was a government official of the previous government. And so when the communists took over, the grandpa had to flee, so he fled to Taiwan, where it's safe and maybe won't be safe for long here. And that their large house in which their whole family lived in, an extended family, so there's maybe 15 to 20 people living in this large house. All the adults, and particularly the male adults, but everyone was shipped off to different parts of China, and they were then put to work, right, in the cause of whatever the government needed. Okay, so one story from my friend's mother's life is that every day they would go to the town center, and there would be a couple armed guards, and they'd have a list. So they'd think about it like a class list. They'd have everyone's name, and they'd have your job for the day for you. And sometimes the job was that you had to be hunched over all day, picking rice out of the ground, or however you grow rice. I'm not very familiar with that. Other jobs where you had to